It begins with the whisper of wind over endless grass, a sound older than empires, older than stone, sweeping across the steppe where the horizon stretches so far that it feels like the world itself was born there, not from cities or temples or books, but from motion and silence and the will of people who refuse to stand still. It was here, in a place that seemed forgotten by time, that a man named Temüjin looked out over the plains and saw not emptiness, but destiny. The 12th century world was fractured, proud kingdoms divided by mountains and oceans, bound by trade routes and rivalries. And yet, all of them would soon learn to fear a name carried on the wind: Genghis Khan. But the story of the Mongol Empire is not just one of conquest and cruelty. It is also the strange, quiet story of how chaos can sometimes give birth to order, how destruction can sow the seeds of connection. To understand whether the Mongols civilized the world or merely burned it, we must travel through the dust of their horses, the smoke of their wars, and the fragile traces of peace they left behind. In the beginning, there was only survival. The Mongol steppe was harsh, a place where winter's breath could kill a man and his horse in a single night, where loyalty was measured by the warmth of a shared fire, and betrayal by the silence that followed. Temüjin grew up in this unforgiving land, betrayed by his father's allies, hunted, enslaved, forgotten, only to rise again with a kind of patience that no empire born in marble could match. When he united the tribes of Mongolia under one banner, it was not through noble diplomacy or divine right, but through blood and fear and promise. A promise that under his rule, no clan would ever again be left to die alone. The sound of hooves became the drumbeat of history, echoing across Asia as the Mongol horde descended like a storm. Cities burned, populations vanished. From the Jin dynasty of northern China to the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, entire civilizations crumbled before an enemy that seemed not human but elemental. The destruction was unimaginable. Historians speak of rivers running red, of towers, of skulls, of libraries turned to ash. And yet, beneath this terror, something else began to move, an invisible current that would change the world. The Mongols were conquerors, yes, but they were also organizers. Where they tore down walls, they built roads. Where they slaughtered armies, they established order. For the first time in human history, the East and West were connected by a single continuous system of communication and trade. The Pax Mongolica. The Mongol peace and irony born from violence, and yet no less real for it. Caravans that once feared bandits now crossed deserts under Mongol protection. Merchants from Venice, Persia, and China traded goods and ideas. Silk for silver, porcelain for paper, faith for knowledge. The Mongols, who had no written tradition of their own, became the unlikely custodians of the world's exchange of ideas. From them, Europe would eventually learn of gunpowder, paper money, and navigational secrets that would change the course of history. And so, as their horses thundered across continents, they stitched together a world that had never before been so connected. But at what cost? For every city that flourished under Mongol rule, 10 more were erased. The beauty of Baghdad, once the jewel of Islamic learning, was drowned in fire and ink, the Tigris running black with the burned pages of its libraries. The Persian city of Nishapur was annihilated so completely that its name became a whisper of death. To the conquered, the Mongols were not civilizers, but a scourge sent by heaven, a punishment for pride. Their methods were brutal beyond measure. Massacres, forced relocations, psychological warfare. Even their diplomacy was edged with cruelty. Surrender meant survival. Resistance meant extinction. And yet, beneath this terror, there was structure. Genghis Khan's legal code, the Yasa, though secret and evolving, bound his vast empire under a strange kind of justice. Theft, adultery, treachery, all punished without favoritism. Religious tolerance was enforced, not out of compassion, but out of practicality. Under Mongol rule, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, and shamans could all worship freely as long as they paid tribute and obeyed. In a world of rigid hierarchies, this was something new, a brutal empire that did not care what gods you prayed to, only that you bowed to the same law. As generations passed, the empire fractured into khanates, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China under Kublai Khan, Genghis's grandson. Kublai, unlike his grandfather, embraced civilization not as an enemy, but as a crown. In the glittering city of Khambalik, now Beijing, he built a capital that merged Mongol ambition with Chinese sophistication. He welcomed scholars, engineers, and travelers like Marco Polo, who carried stories of this strange and splendid court back to Europe. To some, Kublai's reign was proof that the Mongols could indeed civilize. To others, it was proof that civilization had finally tamed the Mongols. And yet even then, the same duality lingered for every reform. There was exploitation. For every innovation, another war. The Mongol postal system, with its network of relay stations, connected cities across Eurasia with unprecedented speed. But it also served to tighten imperial control and facilitate conquest. Their meritocracy allowed even a blacksmith's son to rise in rank, but only within a system born of conquest. They valued trade and communication, yet their empire was built upon destruction so thorough that in many regions it took centuries to recover. The Mongols did not invent civilization, but they redefined how it could expand, not through walls and borders, but through mobility, through the power of movement itself. And when they brought peace, it was the peace of exhaustion, the stillness that follows a storm. As the centuries turned, their legacy became harder to judge. The Black Death carried along the same trade routes they had opened, decimated millions across Europe and Asia, a grim consequence of the very global connectivity they created. In China, their Yuan dynasty collapsed under rebellion and corruption, leaving behind both ruin and progress. In the Middle East, their devastation of cities like Baghdad marked the end of a golden age of Islamic science. But their descendants, like Timur and the later Mughals of India, carried fragments of their vision into new forms of empire and art. Even Russia, long oppressed by the Golden Horde, absorbed the Mongols' administrative and military systems, shaping the rise of its own imperial power centuries later. In this way, the Mongols were like fire. They destroyed, but they also transformed. Their empire did not last long, barely more than a century at its height, but its shockwaves rippled for a millennium. Today, historians still argue, were they barbarians or world shapers, destroyers or unifiers? The truth, perhaps, lies in the quiet space between those extremes. For the Mongols were not devils nor saints, but human beings driven by the harshness of their world, by hunger, by loyalty, by ambition, by a belief that strength alone could bring order to chaos. Their cruelty was real, but so was their genius for adaptation. They learned from those they conquered, absorbing Persian administrators, Chinese engineers, Muslim astronomers. In doing so, they became a mirror to the civilizations they touched, reflecting both the best and worst of humanity. The irony of their story is that a people who once had no cities became masters of cities. A people who once prized freedom above all built one of the most centralized empires in history. And when they vanished, the routes they opened, the Silk Roads of trade and thought, remained. The maps of today still carry their invisible fingerprints. Every exchange of goods between East and West, every idea that crosses oceans, carries a faint echo of hooves on the steppe. Perhaps that is civilization's deepest paradox. It grows not only from peace and reason, but also from conquest and collapse. The Mongol Empire was both a wound and a bridge. It burned worlds to connect them, shattered borders to create new ones. And so, when we ask whether they civilized or destroyed, we may be asking the wrong question. For maybe what they truly did was reveal how fragile civilization itself can be, how easily the thin veil of culture can be torn away, and yet how resilient the human spirit remains, rebuilding again upon the ashes. If you listen closely beyond the noise of history's judgments, you can still hear them. The distant thunder of horses, the wind carrying the scent of smoke and grass, the murmured chant of a people who once ruled the world, not from palaces, but from the open sky. Their empire is gone, their language faded, their monuments few, but their story endures, a reminder that civilization and destruction are not opposites, but companions, each giving meaning to the other. And in that vast, uncertain space between, the Mongols still ride, forever bound to the paradox they created, feared and admired, hated and remembered, both destroyers of worlds and builders of one.